Welcome to Raven's Lair, creating a sex-positive world through adult education and BDSM performance art. The Dominance Handbook, an intimate guide to BDSM, the BDSM Basics Training Program. I am Mistress Gigi. Suicide intervention. It is important to read and understand the Crisis Intervention Training Module before you receive this training in suicide intervention. Hopefully, there will never be a time in your BDSM play scenes where a person is actively thinking about committing suicide. But on a realistic note, BDSM is a progressive lifestyle that does attract some people who have mental health issues of one type or another. While this is relatively rare, it can and does occur. In a BDSM scene, there is potential for a person who has self-destructive behaviors to become suicidal. If this situation arises, then learning about suicide intervention will provide you with techniques to work with what occurs. While this training is not designed to be a substitute for professional intervention and/or professional counseling, it is designed to give you the tools to intervene if a person becomes actively suicidal in your presence. Assistance is also available for dealing with these issues through crisis hotlines and through counseling centers. An important key concept of crisis intervention is understanding the concept of ambivalence. Ambivalence is a part of every human being's nature. All human beings have a side that wants to live and a side that wants to die. Most of our life, the side that wants to live is actively in the forefront, while the side that wants to die is in the background, in a dormant state. When a person becomes suicidal, the part of them that wants to die moves to the foreground and becomes active. At the same time, the part that wants to live is also active to some degree or another. As you perform suicide intervention, help the suicidal person reach for the part of themselves that wants to live by helping them search for alternatives that will help alleviate their pain. There is a risk assessment that you can perform if a submissive is experiencing suicidal ideations. While the suicide risk assessment is not 100% accurate, it does provide a framework to help you determine what type of intervention is indicated. This should act as a guide. If your intuition indicates that the suicide risk is greater than what the suicide risk assessment indicates, then follow your intuition as you provide intervention. Before I cover the suicide risk assessment, it's important to recognize some of the typical myths about suicide. Myth: good circumstances, a happy life, good job, etc. prevents suicide. The fact is, suicide occurs across class, race, age, economic conditions, and sex demographics. Myth: people who talk about suicide will not commit suicide. Fact: people who die by suicide almost invariably talk about suicide or give clues and warnings about their intentions through their behavior, even though the clues may not be recognized at the time. Myth: people who make suicide attempts and do not succeed with other attempts are not at risk for suicide. Fact: the majority of people who commit suicide and die have a history of suicidal attempts. Myth: talking about suicide with a person who is upset will put ideas into their head. The fact is, suicide is a complex psychological process that will not result from a caring person asking questions about suicide intentions. When a person makes statements that gives the slightest hint of self-destructive behaviors, ask directly, "Are you thinking of committing suicide?" While it may seem like it is not a good idea to ask such a question, in fact, often the suicidal person will feel a sense of relief when asked. By asking without making judgments, this opens the door to communication and helps break the feeling of isolation. What happens is that the suicidal person now has someone who they feel they can talk to. There's no substitute for direct communication by a person who cares. Talking about suicide will not put ideas into a person's head. All evidence about suicide shows there are complex psychological processes occurring. If the person is not suicidal, asking if they are contemplating suicide will not lead them to a suicidal path. The suicide risk assessment. Ask if the person has suicidal ideas. If so, are they vague feelings or is there a plan? Lethality of method. Ask the person in crisis, what are you thinking of doing? Is their plan highly lethal or a low lethal method? Availability of means. Ask the person if they have the means to follow out their plan and if they know how to utilize the means. Specificity of the plan. A person who has a well thought out plan, including time, place, and circumstances, with an available high lethal method, should be considered an immediate high risk for suicide. Ask these questions with directness. Do not use power plays when intervening. Find out about the person's intent. Some people really do intend to die. Others intend to bring about change that will help them avoid death and make life more livable. For example, ask, do you want to die or do you want things to improve in your life? We can seldom discover information about a person's suicide plan except through direct questioning. It is important to ask these questions when you encounter a person who is thinking about suicide. It helps to take into account some other factors when evaluating the level of risk of suicide. While these other factors contribute to the risk analysis, they should be secondary to the risk assessment. Is there a history of suicide attempts? Most people who succeed in killing themselves have a history of suicide attempts. In the past attempts was an accidental rescue completed by a third party. By accidental rescue, what is meant is that whether consciously or subconsciously, the person in crisis attempted a suicide plan in an environment where rescue was either possible or probable. Has the person experienced a major loss in their life, and/or has there been a significant life transition? Losses can include death of a friend or family member, job problems, job loss, divorce, etc. Significant life transitions can include things like graduation, job promotion, finding a new partner, middle age, etc. Are there other stress factors in the person's life? Suicide intervention. Utilize the crisis intervention as outlined in the crisis intervention module. In addition, include the following intervention strategies in your crisis intervention plan. Remember that you can call a crisis hotline for assistance with the suicide intervention. Maintain the suicidal person's sense of self-mastery. Involve the suicidal person in the intervention process. Relieve isolation. If the suicidal person lives alone, ask if there are friends or family members that the suicidal person can stay with for a short term. If the person is highly suicidal and their isolation cannot be alleviated, then voluntary hospitalization may be required. Remove lethal weapons and/or means to suicide with active collaboration with the suicidal person in this process. If caring and concern are expressed and you demonstrate respect of the suicidal person's sense of self-mastery and control, then the suicidal person will usually surrender the means to suicide so that it is safe from easy or impulsive access. Contract with the suicidal person to avoid a decision about suicide until they have explored all other alternatives. Reinforce this with the concept that seeking suicide as the only option is a temporary state. As the crisis subsides, other options will become more plausible. Reestablish social ties and networks. Make every effort to help the suicidal person reestablish social bonds if they are broken. If this fails, have the suicidal person make contact with a support group or network. As applicable, relieve extreme anxiety, utilize anger management techniques, and provide a safe environment for sleep if there has been sleep loss. Ask the suicidal person if they are using drugs, street drugs and/or prescribed drugs, and/or alcohol. Have them address drug-alcohol issues in their plan, even if only for a temporary discontinuation until the crisis passes. If they are on prescribed medications, have them consult with their doctor about the suicidal ideations to determine if alternative medications would be of benefit. Some prescription medications can have side effects that cause or exacerbate depression. Let them know that alcohol is an enhancer as a short-term effect, which will in the short run enhance the mood they were in when they started drinking, and act as a depressant as a long-term effect. Drinking alcohol will add to their feelings of depression, especially if they are feeling depressed when they start drinking. Include counseling and/or psychotherapy in the crisis intervention plan. Some final thoughts. When working with a person who is experiencing a crisis, it is important to stay calm and focused. By utilizing the steps outlined here, you can effectively provide crisis intervention and assist the person in crisis to return to their normal level of functioning. When you take on the role of a crisis intervention practitioner, you may be the first person who the person in crisis feels safe in discussing problems that they have never openly discussed. Thus, active listening at this level can provide a powerful healing process for the person in crisis. It's a good idea to have the phone numbers for resources in your area handy. Resources can include a crisis hotline, a counseling center, and a GLBT community center, and city services. Suicide Intervention, a PDF file. Remember to download the PDF file below this video.